We're going to call our regular meeting. We apologize for being late. We were at a lunch on homelessness, so we just got back. Good event. But if you will, bow with me. Father, I thank you for this chance that we get to come together. Lord, may we make decisions that are fitting to you. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. If you'll stand, let's pledge allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right. We'll move into new business. We have a public facility improvement, the We Care Daycare.
Hello. Sure you can hear me. We have a request for a motion to reimburse the general fund from CDBG for improvements for the We Care Daycare.
This is a building that's owned by the city.
It is, yeah, owned by the
And
city.
so it does need roof repairs, and we're obligated to make exterior repairs to the building. One that's come up now. I think it's been deferred for a while, so.
For approval.
Second.
Motion is second. Ms. Wright, please call the roll.
Vice Mayor Skels Harris.
Aye.
Mr. LaLance.
Aye.
Mr. Martin.
Aye.
Mr. Shacklet.
Aye.
Mr. Smotherman.
Aye.
Mr. Wade.
Aye.
Mayor McFarland.
Aye. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, we'll move to items for our workshop. And first, we have a road project update. I think Mr. Griffith is going to give us a 30,000-foot view of what's going on.
That's a quick presentation, isn't it? Any questions? No. Thank you, Mayor, for the opportunity and members of the council for the opportunity to present on road projects. I also want to thank Kayla Potter and Jim Kerr. They kind of the brainchilds of all the information that you're going to see here today for putting this together. It is a PowerPoint. It's not quite Darren Gore standards, but we're trying. We're getting there. I will say just before we get started, the info is as of right now. Certainly, local projects can move up and down on the schedule based on council priorities. TDOT's projects generally kind of they're so large they kind of just go through their natural progression, but there is some flexibility in their timeline as well. Just a reminder, and I think you've got one on your desk, you do get monthly updates on these as part of Erin's information that she sends out. I'll just say while I'm going through this, feel free to stop me at any time if you have a question on a particular project. This is our Bradyville Pike project, and just a little bit layout here. We've got the cost there underneath the name of the project, and then we've got a little diagram showing the location of it. If you guys will remember, this is a 2.1 mile widening from a 2-lane to a 3-lane road. Really important here with the sidewalks, bike lanes, and also transit shelters. We've broken the funding down, as you can see there, about $306,000, $307,000 locally, with the lines portion of it coming from the federal and state. We're currently in right-of-way acquisition for that. There's about 150 tracks, and then we're scheduled to start construction in 2022. Brinkley Road, very similar project. Rebuild that to a 3-lane section with curb gutter, sidewalk, and that will also have a multi-use path. If you'll remember, that serves most of the Blackman School area. We've had quite a bit of development along that roadway. That is funded entirely by local funds, but through the city CIP program. We're currently developing right-of-way plans for that, with construction set to start sometime in 2021. These are back-to-back projects. Cherry Lane Phase 2 and Cherry Lane Phase 3 will be the next one. This is the section that's funded locally. This is the first one that we kind of started there from the Siegel soccer fields out over to Sulphur Springs. As you can see, that $16.8 million locally. We're just beginning the right-of-way acquisition for that, with the construction to start 2021. And I'll skip on to Cherry Lane Phase 3. This is the one that does have federal money attached to it, a little over $7 million total. We are actively trying to get additional grants or trying to seek additional money for to offset some of that $47 million local. That will be a 5-lane road, includes an interchange at State Route 840. And the project is divided. It's divided into at least 2 phases, probably 3 phases, basically east and west of 840. We've taken proposals to begin right-of-way acquisition for that, and again, we hope construction will start in 2021 for that project. The Gateway Boulevard extension is a new one that we just started preliminary design. Actually, just getting ready to start the survey on that. This will be a new 3-lane road from Robert Rose Drive to Gateway Boulevard. It is locally funded at a little less than $2.5 million. It's a pretty simple design and not a whole lot of tracks involved. We're scheduled to start construction for 2022 on it, hoping to alleviate some of the traffic that we're having there at Robert Rose and Thompson Lane and Medical Center Parkway and Thompson Lane as well. That outline of the buildings you see there is the Oaks Shopping Center, and then of course the golf course is to the right of it. Jones Boulevard, we're a little over halfway complete with the right-of-way acquisition for the first phase of this. This will be between West Clark and Medical Center Parkway. Of course, we'll be improving that to a 3-lane curb and gutter section with a multi-use path and sidewalk. That project's locally funded, and we hope to start construction on it a little bit later this year. I will say the totals for that includes Phase 1 and 2. Phase 2 will be from West Clark up to Northfield, which will complete the entire project. Phase 2, I believe, is currently scheduled to start in 2022. So basically, once we get done with Phase 1, we'll almost be rolling into Phase 2. New Salem Phase 1. This is the section of New Salem between I-24 and Old Fort Parkway. It's about 1.35 miles, widening that to a 5-lane section. As you can see, the state is picking up most of the funding for that. We did some mainly funds for engineering on that. May have had a little bit in the right of way, but like I said, most of it's in the state's picking up. They're finishing the final plans for that now. I believe the right of way is pretty much acquired. And then the construction is scheduled to start in that 2021. And basically, the way they're doing these New Salem projects is whenever they get close to finishing one, they're bidding the next one and moving on. Phase 2 is the project that's under construction now. There from I-24 back to Cason Lane, typical section, 5-lane typical section with sidewalks. And as I said, that's currently under construction, scheduled to be completed by the end of the year. Phase 3 will start after phase 1 is complete. And that'll go from Cason Lane on out to Veterans Parkway. About 2.5 miles, $23 million, and again, the state is picking up most of, well, all of the funding for it. Rucker Lane, we're getting ready to, actually, it's advertised for construction right now. It's rebuilding Rucker Lane from State Route 96 to Veterans Parkway to a 3-lane section with curb and gutter and sidewalks, about 2.4 miles. That's all locally funded. We did have some, and on some of these, whenever I say it's locally funded, it's either through the CIP, or we do have also, as the areas are developed along the ways, a lot of times developers will pay a fees in lieu of, or they'll do the improvements themselves in front of their development. But this, we're excited to get started on this project. It's been a long time coming, and it's probably one of the more requests we get from residents. Rutherford Boulevard extension. This is one of the routes that was shown in the 2040 Major Thoroughfare Plan. It's basically to extend Rutherford Boulevard as a new 3-lane road with a bridge over I-24 over to Warrior Drive. If you'll remember, one of the big problems that we're having is the congestion at our interchanges. And so what we're trying to do here is just a straight bridge over the interstate to help help some of the residential areas trying to gravitate towards downtown or towards our industrial areas. That project is currently locally funded at $23.5 million. We're just working out some of the schematics, so it's in preliminary design. With construction scheduled to start in 2023.
Hey, Chris?
Yes.
Give me a little frame of reference. I'm having trouble seeing where that is.
Yeah, if you'll look just to the south there, you'll start to pick up Riverdale's campus there. So it just comes in just to the north of Riverdale's campus there on Warrior Drive, on the Warrior side. The new development that's you can see just to the left of the picture there, and then on the other side.
Okay. So Rutherford, where it crosses Church Street and comes over west of Church Street,
Yes.
ends right there.
Exactly.
All right, got it,
Exactly.
yeah.
Rutherford Boulevard signal improvements. This is a new project for us. It's the implementation of our adaptive signal control technology. It's basically, for lack of a better term, it's a smart signal system that learns as traffic progresses. It's the interconnection of 15 traffic signals through fiber optic cable to the existing traffic operations center, trying to get our roads to work smarter and not necessarily have to do so much with adding lanes. We're about as wide as we want to be with Rutherford Boulevard, and just trying to get those signals to work better. We're in final plans with that, with construction to start later this year. As you can see, that was, I think, a lot of the construction was 100% federal, and I think we put some money in on the engineering. Thompson Lane widening. This is, I'd say, this project, along with Cherry Lane and probably our New Salem, is probably our three biggest, most important projects we've got going on now. These are really our volume meters. It's to widen to 5 lanes, including a sidewalk and multi-use path from Northwest Broad to Memorial. It's a little over 4 miles in length. You can see the state's picking up most of the cost on that. They're basically at the same spot that we are on Cherry Lane. They're just starting to advertise for right-of-way firms. About 150 tracks involved with that, so we expect that to take 2 to 3 years. with construction starting in 2023. Warrior Drive extension, it's a new project. This is some of the new development. We're working with the SIA grant funding from TDOT. It also includes some improvements there at the intersection of Warrior and New Salem as well. We're in preliminary design on it, actually working on the survey, and hope to start construction a little bit later this year. And just the last slide there, just to kind of give you a overview of our funding sources. As you can see, about 58% of our projects are currently being funded through the state or federal means. Now, if it's federally funded, that could be the part of that's money that's earmarked for City of Murfreesboro, and we're just choosing to use that federal money towards those projects. With about, about 42% of it being funded locally. And we're just kind of giving you a chart there on to the right just to see when the projects are scheduled to roll out for construction. Now I'm ready for any more questions that you've got.
On all the projects you showed the start date, do you see any of the projects going maybe over 3 years? Would you say they are going to be anywhere from 18 months to 3 years?
That's 18 months to 2 years is our normal construction time. I would say on Rucker Lane, we're probably looking at about 2.5 years for it, just with the length of it. We can build about anywhere from 2 to 3 miles during that 2-year time frame. Thompson Lane, I'd say that'd take, especially with the bridge there, I'd say that'd take every bit of 3 years. Matter of fact, the state may want to look at that. It's a $50-60 million project. They may want to look at breaking that up into two phases.
So have you guys, I know in the major thoroughfare plan, there were the kind of those grades, of the ratings, I guess may be a better way to say that.
Yes.
Have you guys worked with anybody or gone to, as far as how you chose these? Are these where we kind of get the biggest bang for our buck as it relates to traffic, or is it, I know there's a lot of factors in it, but
Sure.
Is that one of the things that's happened?
All of these are what we would call we're on the short-term improvement. So you had short-term, mid-term, and long-term. All of these fall into the short-term improvements. There are volume projects, which obviously is what we need the most right now. And then some of them were just to, the Warrior Drive, for instance. We had economic development opportunity there, so we wanted to move forward with it. We had we've got an operation problem with just the amount of traffic we've got there on Thompson and Medical Center and Robert Rose. So we thought that gateway connector might be a good way to kind of redirect some traffic. So I guess to answer your question, we're always going to tend more to the volume projects, really focusing on their short-term improvements. But we also, if we've got an economic development opportunity to where we can get the lion's share of the funding, either through the state or through the developer, we're going to look on that.
Do we already have from that major thoroughfare plan, or would it be worth it? I mean, this might be a question for council, but I mean, look, we obviously got some decisions coming up in front of us at some point or another. We got CIP, we got the MED stuff we got to talk about eventually as a council. Does it make sense? We may already have this information, but if not, does it make sense for us to try to go ahead and have you guys task someone with, getting what are the top 2, 3, 4, 5
Sure.
volume projects in addition to what we got here that you guys, we just trust y'all to say these are, where the priority is. If we, with this other stuff that we're dealing with, can you guys? Do you already have that, or could you task somebody? Is that something we think would be? I mean, I don't. you know, just so we all know, at least have in our pocket when we're thinking about how much our CIP is gonna be and what we're gonna put in, what we're gonna take out. If we had a prioritization of, hey, look, here's 4 projects that we think would change the volume picture substantially, I mean, that'd be something that I'd like to know.
We could develop that specific to roadway. I mean, you have the CIP and you have prioritizations in the CIP, but we could drill down to the roadway projects.
Yeah,
and
I mean,
prioritize
just for
those if you'd
roads.
like. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I
Is that-
think,
Go ahead.
I was just gonna say, to piggyback on what Rick's saying, I'd be interested in the overlap between the state and federal funding available to us if we start those projects, and what spots are the high volume, the correlation between those two things to make sure we're maximizing our dollars. I'm sure that's what you guys have done,
Sure.
but it's hard to see that based on what we're looking at. So, kind of the nexus behind the decision.
It's always good, if you have a wish list, it's always good to go to TDOT with the checkbook as well and offer some seed funds to start the project. So, you know, whether that be, you know, $1 million, it's usually some percentage of the project, but they want to know that it's important to us as well. So, yes, I think that's certainly something we could,
Is that something that you guys will do, or we need to hire somebody to do it? I mean, because, I'd rather have that information sooner rather than later as we're making these decisions, just my personal preference on it. I mean, the council would need to say what they think about it, but if we need to hire somebody, I'd assume we get moving on that.
Sure. I'd like to take a shot at it, and then, or have our staff take a shot at it, and then, maybe have maybe some of the consultants, or hire somebody to look at it and kind of get their input on it. Because certainly, you know, while we do know where some of the worst congested areas are, it's always good to get feedback and get somebody else's ideas on it.
Mr. Griffith, and I'm sure there's an answer to this, I just don't know what it is, but obviously that south side of Brinkley Road, of that extension, that's county, it's not city property. And so is there been any discussion about expanding that road to Blaze and not extending it all the way to Highway 96?
I have not. I have looked at just the possibility of, it's got a bridge there over the creek. I have looked at the possibility of just doing the bridge, and maybe just on, because we got Berkshire there on that's to the west of it, and then of course the schools to the east, and look at that as a possible project. And that's certainly something I think it'd be worthwhile. The major complaint we get on Brinkley is kids walking across that bridge without any sort of pedestrian. We've actually got some neat stuff with that, because they're still going to have to cross the road, but we've made a pedestrian path and a walkway that'll actually go under the new bridge, so they can cross there safely. But that's something we've had a lot of development along that road, but I think the bridge project would be a great help there if we wanted to look at scaling something back.
Yeah, Chris, I agree exactly where he's coming from, because the county situation on Brinkley Road is really the county's problem, and not that it's not being conveyed over to the people who live in Berkshire and stuff, but if we can just get that bridge improved and get them to Blaze, I think that would be a tremendous asset to go ahead and try and get that just in a phase done, and then phase the other part as a separate phase, so that, and it's kind of like the hotspot philosophy that we've had. I can't say how much I think it's helped at John Rice and Old Fort Parkway, Cason Lane there.
Thank you.
Just being able to double that intersection's capacity in those stacking lanes has been a phenomenal help as far as moving traffic. The John Rice Boulevard, where it gets to Thompson Lane there, and it's got the culvert, I know, which is the challenge, I think, beside it. But it's really not John Rice that's the problem. It's that one no right turn lane turning onto Thompson Lane there. And if there was a right turn lane there, half the traffic that's backing up on John Rice goes away.
Yeah.
Or not John Rice, but
Yeah, it is John Rose.
Robert
But-
Rose.
Robert Rose.
Robert Rose.
Robert
yeah.
Rose.
Which actually we've bid that project and hope to be starting construction on that in the next few months. So
But with those, looking at those hot spots, I think that's where we get the biggest bang for our buck and the most impact that we can quickly say, okay, because people don't complain to me about there being a lot of traffic on the road. They complain about there being a lot of traffic at the intersections where we're stockpiling all these people. And I know without land, you can't make the road wider, but if there's any scenario that we can add a few lanes on these turn lanes and stuff like that, where you can double your capacity of people that get through that intersection on the one signalized series, then it helps tremendously. And so I think it's more about, for me personally, I think our challenge is more really not so much the roadways, but the intersections. And because that's
they're going to
where-
be your pinch points, and thanks to the council, I remember. I guess it's been about 3 years ago. You all challenged us on the intersections and some local improvements that we could make, and then you funded them. So I think it's worked really well.
About staffing, I mean, that's a lot on the list. You got concerned about staff levels we have being able to manage effectively those projects.
Not the field portion of it. We've got quite a bit. Let me get back with you on the project coordination side of it, because it is these federal and state projects. It's just so much paperwork and so much that goes into it. So much as monthly audits on it. It's just it's really a lot of work. Kayla does a great job with what she's doing now, but. If we get some of these going, she may need some help. I appreciate you. She likes a lot of work, but I don't know if she likes that much.
The majority of those projects are all 21 and 22. Looks like a bunch of projects in 21, 22, and 23.
Yes, it's yes. We have Rucker, mainly Rucker and Robert Rose, the turn lane that Mr. Smotherman mentioned. And I think that's it as far as, and Jones Boulevard. I'm sorry, Jones Boulevard will start this year, and then all the rest of them are later.
Would you forward us your PowerPoint? I'd like to see that.
Sure, absolutely, yes. May it's kind of a big file, but I'll send you a link that'll let you download it.
All right, any more questions for Mr. Griffith?
Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Mr. Griffith, I had mentioned this to Sam, but if we could set something up, I'd be happy to set a meeting with not just to look at with some of the current funding we have on how we can leverage that. So I think he was going to try to set that up for Jim and all of us to go down and meet
Sure,
with
absolutely.
Mr. Daggs and the Commissioner.
We'd be glad to do that.
All right, let's go into our annual audit report.
While Jimmy and Chris switch out, for those in the audience that don't know, the audit report has already been posted online to our website, so it's available for the public to view as well.
Well, thank you, Mr. Mayor and members of the council. Pleased to be here. I won't claim this will be the most exciting part of your agenda, but we'll get through it quickly. Now, as you imagine, this takes quite a while. We've got a 200-page report here as far as the city's finances, and it takes us a lot of time, a lot of time with Melissa and her department, and they're, as usual, give us great cooperation and assistance, so we appreciate that. So, as I said, the report's available on the website, so that's out there for the citizens or anybody else interested in that. We have, let's see here. Once again, for the 21st year in a row, the city's report has received the Certificate of Achievement and Excellence in Financial Reporting. And the report every year is submitted to a group in Chicago called the GFOA, Government Finance Officers Association. And they go through thoroughly in this report to make sure that it meets standards above the average in presenting the financial data of the city, and that it's readable and presents the finances in a way that meets their high criteria. So that's 21 years in a row that we've met that standard. So, and this current report will be submitted for that as well. While I'd like to introduce my staff back here. I've got Suzanne Vandiver and Molly Patrikas, who are responsible for a great deal of the work that goes into this. They are two of the most experienced auditors in the state, and especially with the city of Murfreesboro and its systems. And we're happy that they've stayed with me so long, and that they do have that experience. Now, the audit process, if you imagine this 200 pages of the report represents hundreds of thousands of transactions that the city does. So in our audit, we, of course, can't look at every transaction. So we have to make a judgment as to where the areas would be that we need to look at. Now, what benefits the city and the council and the citizens of having an experienced staff, especially one experienced with the city itself, is that we determine what risk areas there are and where they might be, so that we can focus in those areas and do an efficient, productive audit for you. So I think that's important to point out, and that's how we address the first thing we do is have a meeting with our staff, and we talk about those risk areas. Where could something go wrong? Where could there be a misclassification or misappropriation of some kind? And that's where we focus our audit. So I just thought that was something to emphasize. This is our audit report, which is right behind the tab called Independent Auditor's Report there. It is couple of pages there, but what it says is we issued an unqualified or unmodified opinion, a clean opinion on the city's financials for the year ended June 30th of 19. So nothing unusual about that. It is a clean report. The next page after that is called Management's Discussion and Analysis. And this is it's several pages long, and it's a good overview of the financial highlights of the year. And it's a good place to start for anyone interested in just getting a brief overview of the financial activity for the year, what the highlights are. One thing that's pointed out in here is that the fund balance in the general fund, the unassigned fund balance, is 51.4% of general fund expenditures, or it's a balance of $61 million. Now, that's unassigned fund balance. And another way to look at that's just over 6 months of expenditures that is sitting there unassigned. So that gives an indication of the strength of the balance sheet and the strength of the city as far as financial well-being. Let me turn over to the government-wide. There's a tab that says government-wide financial statements. The first statement there is called the Statement of Net Position. We've talked about before, and I won't go into it too in depth, but there are two presentations that a city government has. One is an overview, sort of like a business, where you show all the assets and liabilities of the city. And that would include infrastructure, it would include all the fixed assets, it includes the normal cash and and all long-term liabilities like bonds and that sort of thing. So this includes everything in the city, not just what's available for the budget. And you'll see there on page 22, all the assets and liabilities, and down at the bottom, you've got the net position of the city, which is assets minus the liabilities. It's broken down into governmental activities and business type being the utilities mainly. And you'll see at the total net position at the end of June was $1.1 billion. So that's important to note. You'll see one thing to point out, though, here is that in governmental activities column there, you'll see down in the net position column, down at the bottom, there is an unrestricted balance here, and it's a negative number. Now, again, this includes all the liabilities of the city. One of the big liabilities that's come about in the last few years is what's called the OPEB liability, or other post-employment benefits. What that really means is the health insurance. And the theory behind this liability is that as employees are working now, they're accruing a liability of supporting their retirement years. In other words, we've got to fund that sometime in the future, their health insurance until they have Medicare or some other source. And it turns out to be, it's up here, it's $119 million is the liability that's accrued at June 30th, which represents the current workforce, what that's going to cost us sometime in the future to provide those benefits.
How do you calculate the growth in medical expenses? I mean, is there a percentage that just goes out there? Or?
It's an actuarial calculation, and they use estimates of what they think the health insurance coverage is going to increase. There's estimates about lifespans and how long they'll need those coverages. It's a very complex computation that
It does take in consideration the fact that the city has basically an older workforce that will be going into that, so it's weighted towards the sooner, not later.
it does take into account their ages and that sort of thing.
Finley is our actuary, and they do that in addition to the pension computations. You met Michael Guyton here before. There's a man there named David Schwab that does this computation for us every other year.
And the difference between that liability and the pension liability is that we're not setting aside assets to cover that liability. Whereas with a pension, of course, the city does set aside assets to cover those pension benefits. So it's a high liability, and it increases every year, really.
And we every year elect to do pay-as-you-go because it's not part of our pension plan. It is something that we make a decision every year how we want to handle those benefits after people retire. And last year I was at a meeting in which Moody's presented, that's a rating agency that we use when we go to bonds, and I asked them how many cities do they see actually setting up a trust for the OPEB liability, and he said very few. Most people are still doing the pay-as-you-go.
Yes, it would be very unusual for a city, at least now, to have a trust fund or anything to cover that.
Unless it's in their pension plan.
Yeah. So that's just of course, a huge liability just to point out. Of course, that again is way in the future that most of that would come due. So the next page over is that was the balance sheet, basically, and then you have the statement of activities. Again, this is a government-wide presentation. It's not really aligned with the budget. This includes all expenses, including depreciation on assets. It's more like a business operation would present their financials. But it's intended to show what support each function of government needs from either taxes or their own fees that they generate. So you'll see the functions down the side there. And for instance, police had a total expenses of $39.5 million for the year. And then there are certain sources of revenue that support that expense, whether it's fees that are charged, or in the police department there's relatively small amounts that come in. So when you get to the column under governmental activities, it's $38.3 million that has to be supported through taxes or other sources of revenue, and you'll see those down at the bottom. So each function is kind of presented in that manner. Now, flipping on over behind the fund financial statements, this is the other type of presentation, and it's more like on the budget type of presentation. And in the balance sheet here, all we're presenting is what's available for the budget coming in the next year, which would be liquid assets, cash, and things that will soon be cash, and then liabilities that are coming due likely within the budget year. So, and this is where we have the unassigned fund balance. If you look under the general fund column there, down at the bottom, unassigned fund balance of $61 million. So that's the money that's available to support the budget. And if you go to page 28, well, I'm sorry, I probably should point out on page 26 first. This is all funds of the city and the revenues and expenses that were incurred for the year. And it's the major funds of the city, the general fund, the general purpose school funds, which is all the schools, of course, and debt service, and then a column for other governmental funds. So this shows all the governmental activities for the year and the total revenues and total expenditures there. And then as we flip over to page 28, the general fund is presented along with its budget. And it's very, very detailed as far as general fund expenditures and revenues and the budget for the year. Page 37 is total expenditures for the general fund. And you'll see that actual expenditures were $118.9 million for the year. And that was under the budget of $128 million for the year. And then there's a tab called Notes to Financial Statements behind there. We've got pages and pages of information on the accounting standards that are used, information on the bonds and debt is presented in this section. There's a lot of details on pension, the pension fund. Our pension plans. So lots of information there about the benefits available to the employees, the debt of the city. Now, also back in the supplementary section, let me get to, back on pages 163. And 163 is a new schedule this year. And it's called Schedule of Changes in Long-Term Debt. Let y'all get there. This gives a lot of information about the debt of the city. It includes the original amount of the debt or bond issue. It tells what the interest rates are, when they were issued. It tells what's outstanding at this point. And then it tells what the city had paid during the current year, and then the amount outstanding. It also tells which fund of the city is responsible for paying that debt service, whether it's the general fund or the debt service fund or the Water Resources Department. And so that's useful information that hasn't been there before. That's some details about the debt there. And back behind the tab called Statistical section, there's several pages of some 10-year trends that give some indications of growth and how things have changed over the years. Won't go through those, but there are several of those. One in particular is on page 171. That's useful in just showing the growth in the sales tax and property tax over the last 10 years. For instance, there you'll see that in 2010, the sales tax collections were about $28 million. This past year, they were up over $48 million, so a $20 million increase over the period of 10 years. Page 180. This gives some information about the outstanding debt in total. If you look at the last couple of columns there, the last column is per capita debt, and you'll see that's actually decreased this year from $3,300 last year to $2,900 per capita for this end of the fiscal year. And it also shows the percentage of personal income in the city, which is also decreased. Page 183 shows the legal debt margin. The legal debt is defined by the state law, and this just shows that the city is within that margin by a large degree, 45.23% of the allowable debt margin. Okay, and on 187, starting on 187, there's just different statistics about number of employees, information about the different departments, police, arrests, 911 calls, different statistics as far as different departments. Those are presented there. And on page 195, we were talking about federal money as far as the road projects and that sort of thing. 195 through 197 presents the amount of federal and state grants that were received by the city and which departments those came from. So you can see all the federal grants the city received for the year and how those were used. Okay, and then the very back, page 203, is just a summary of the audit. Basically, it says that we had a unmodified opinion, that it was clean opinion, and it also states that there were no significant deficiencies reported here, so there were no findings reported. And I think that's about as quick as I can get through 200 pages, so
Good stuff.
be happy to answer any questions.
Showing Ronnie this. I think this is interesting. Since 2010, our employee headcount has increased 465 people, so that's 19%. But out of that 19%, 337 are are related to education. So really, our governmental headcount in years has increased 130 people, which is pretty astounding when you look at the growth the community's had, and then our headcount's gone up by 130 people. I would be willing to bet that out of that 130 people, the majority are all police and fire. I would be willing to. So, the only other thing I made a note, Mr. Joe, just to make sure, our general fund, we were showing, Melissa, budgeting using $5 million into fund balance last year, and we added $3.2 million to fund balance. So I thought that's something to make sure and note that we did budget to hit fund balance, but it was a $10 million swing that we did add into fund balance this last year. So,
What page was that employee count on?
180 something.
87, I think.
187?
I think that's right.
Yeah. That looks like it.
I will say on adding to the fund balance, we did have some one-time things, like selling Franklin Synergy
Yeah.
and Vanderbilt property. I think, was that in the
That was actually budgeted. So revenue to
that
come
one?
in.
Okay.
But we had some other expenses that were deferred to fiscal year 20. And so that affects that as well. And we'll likely see those expenses show up in this year's actuals instead.
All right, any questions for Mr. Joe? It's a lot of information, but it's a lot of good information. So, Mr. Joe, thank you for you and your team. We appreciate y'all's every year getting to see y'all.
Thank you.
Once again, you all the best in the world.
Thank you.
Stay in business. You did an
We are
excellent
that.
job.
Thank you.
All right, thanks, Mr. Joe. All right, we'll move into potential debt refinancing.
So we'll have John Warner from Cumberland Securities is coming in to talk to us about several of our variable rate issues that are outstanding right now, and just looking to see if we want to consider moving to fixed rate at this time while rates are, I'd say, at historic lows at this point. So, John, go right ahead.
Thank you. I think you should all have in front of you some pages that outline our what John will talk about.
Yes, I did.
Just push this button. We don't have any kind of a action.
Is it already hot?
Yeah, I know it's actually on. Great.
Refinancing possibility.
We don't need to have action particularly today. If council feels comfortable, we can talk about it. I think today is a presentation just to have an understanding of what's out there, and then we'd bring it back to council for action in an evening meeting.
Okay. Just for the record's sake, I'm going to abstain from the discussion.
Okay, and to answer your question, before you, council can take up any action, we would have to do a refunding report with the comptroller's office, get their acknowledgement of that report, and that would become part of the actual resolution. When staff is ready for us to move forward with any potential refunding, all we would need to do is start working on that and then just be prepared for that council meeting.
Just for clarity, just in case Raymond James is in any way associated with any of the discussions, I'm going to be out.
It's a high probability that they would be the underwriter because they buy a lot of Tennessee municipal paper. They've bought a lot of your paper in the past, and they frequently rank in the top 1, 2, or 3.
Yeah.
Okay. The first, there's a couple of things out in front of you. The first thing is the summary of debt. They just talked about it just a few minutes ago about your outstanding balances and that sort of thing. With particular attention to the general obligation debt, pages 1 through 15 breaks out every individual piece of debt that the city has at this time, both variable and fixed. We did use for the variable rate debt interest rate the 2.5% that I believe Melissa uses for her budgetary preparations and that sort of thing. And as you look through it, it's, you have a lot of short-end debt, and then as you get a little bit older out, it goes out to more 10, 15 years. Let me just go ahead and say the 15-year debt structure that you have done again and again and again has served the city well. It certainly does put a certain amount of budgetary discipline into the process, and more importantly, it makes sure that you're paying off your debt sooner rather than later, and it also keeps it very close to the life of the asset itself. And all those things are really good things that you can do when you go through the rating processes, and also, again, from a budgetary standpoint. If you will fast forward a little bit and you go to page 13, you'll see on page 13 the total the estimated outstanding debt that the city has, which is approximately, from a general fund standpoint, almost $271 million. And then on page 14 is a very nice graphic of what the amortization schedule looks like. So you can see that any potential bond funding that you want to do in the future, layering that into the quickly amortizing debt service schedule that you already have really does serve you well because you have a lot of capacity out into the future. Okay? And then on page 15, and this is where probably the city has done a really good job, if not an outstanding job, over the past few years, is eliminating as much of their variable rate debt possible, putting it more towards fixed, and they've done it in an extremely favorable market. And more importantly, as when you have rating agencies, which in this particular case would be S&P and Moody's, who rate the city's bonds right now, that's very important for them because any variable rate products tend to make them a little bit more nervous than a true fixed rate. So that if the market ever goes against you, you know what your cost is, and you lock those in as of the day of the sale. The next few pages that you see, pages 16 through 27, are your water services debt. And again, using the same assumptions that Melissa had for the variable rate piece, the other ones are rates that are included or part of the debt service you have right now. If you go to page 25, Water Services has approximately $96 million in debt. And again, you can see on page 26 the way that it rolls off over time as well. And again, the ability to have future capacity to take on more debt without necessarily having to add any additional dollars to your current funding sources, which right now comes specifically from the Water Services Department, works very well for you all. And then on page 27, you have the fixed rate, the variable rate analysis. You have about 80% fixed rate and about 21% variable. And then finally, the electric department, same assumptions, same assertions. And if you go to page 30, they have approximately $3 million of outstanding debt. Graphically, it doesn't look as pretty on page 32, where you have approximately 87% of that in variable rate debt, but it's extremely short. I mean, extremely short, 3 years short, if you include starting fiscal year 21. And of course, they also have fund balance to take care of that. And then finally, on page 33, this is the city of Murfreesboro's picture, what it looks like from their debt from all of their sources, both from the water and also from the electric, as well as the governmental sources. And of course, that amortization looks on page 34 there. And then finally, on the last page, the city has about 81% fixed rate debt versus 19% variable. It's pretty straightforward. We certainly want you to use this as part of your budgetary process, particularly as you start talking about your community investment program and the ways that you want to consider funding it and that sort of thing. It's a pretty useful tool. And we can certainly get Melissa extra copies if you want us to prepare those for you as well. Are there any questions as it pertains specifically to the summary of debt? Okay. On the next one is the preliminary analysis. What we did was we looked at this about a year ago, a little bit less than a year ago, about 9 months ago, talking about opportunities to refund some debt. And we identified from at least a variable standpoint, and those were also at those rates 9 months ago, we looked at about 4 pieces of debt. And then after looking at it and trying to get a feel for, is it makes sense to do that? Are you getting the best bang for your buck? We kind of came to the conclusion that it looks pretty good, but is it worth going through all the effort to do that sort of thing? We just got through doing the $58 million privately placed bond, and at that particular time, it just didn't look very good, or it looked okay. But those numbers have improved considerably over the last 9 months. Rates have dropped on the variable rate piece for a AAA index that I follow about 75 basis points, putting us in a market rate right now that is historical lows. So if you can take, and I'll get to this conclusion again, but so if you can look at your variable rate debt now as opposed to what it looked like 9 months ago, does it make sense? And we think the numbers do look sense. We did take out one particular piece of debt because it was only one maturity left, extraordinarily short. We thought it didn't make as much of we didn't think it was very effective refunding that particular piece, but the other 3 parts we did. And if you will look again back at this and you go to page 1, we identified as a refunding candidate within the general fund, and this would be the same debt that would be on page 6 in your summary of debt. Bond fund number 4, it has about $18.8 million of outstanding principal, outstanding as of July 1, 2020. And then we will also look, and I'll just go ahead and just say it now. We also identified on the water services piece, TMBF loan number 1 and TMBF number 2, which is about $20.3 million of principal outstanding. But let's go back to the general fund piece. If we were to refund today in a competitive public market, we are estimating that it looks, if we were to do that, that the cost to refund that, the cost of money, would be about 1.25%, or roughly half of what you're budgeting right now. and probably approximately 75 basis points less than what you're paying in reality. And when I say in reality, on a variable rate piece, you pay a base, which is from a SIFMA index, which resets every Wednesday at 4 o'clock. And right now it's about 115. Plus then you have other fees that go with a variable rate debt. And all those fees together come up to just south of a 2% rate. Okay? So if you were to look at the budget rate that you're taking of 2.5% versus the 1.25% of cost of money, you would be saving about $482,000. That's an approximate number. But really the importance in this is not so much the savings, although that is an important part. The more important part also, the other two important parts is you will be reducing the amount of debt outstanding, which I think all of your constituents would be glad to hear that you did, and I'll explain how you get there. And the second part, and probably more importantly, is you would also be getting, you'd be taking the variable rate risk completely off the table. And both of those two parts collectively go a long, long way with moving the city closer to that AAA rating that, I've heard being discussed. It'd be kind of a goal to have, is to have the same kind of rating that the state of Tennessee has. Okay? And that's by doing those two pieces. But let's go back to how we got to those numbers in particular. If we did a refunding and we were to refund the $18.78 million worth of debt that you have, you would not only be able to get a amount of money to pay off that principal itself, you would also get a premium. We're anticipating a premium. Now, you will get those premiums with a 5% coupon, but the important part is you would be able to reduce the amount of debt you have outstanding the day after the sale is closed. And you'd be generating less interest rate expense because you generated so much premium, thus reducing the amount of par outstanding. Okay? You wouldn't have an opportunity as you would like a new money if you had premium. Hey, can you keep the money and use it for other projects? You would simply want to reduce the amount of principal outstanding. So if you're looking at page 2, and you say, well, John said the rate was going to be about 1.25%, but I'm looking up here and it says a 5% coupon. Well, with that 5% coupon, just remember, you're reducing $18.7 million worth of debt and reissuing $17.29 million worth of debt that you'll be repaying with the 5% coupon. So comparing the two together, your cost of money is still going to be significantly less, about 1.25%. Okay? And then on page 4, the same kind of application applies to bond fund number 1, which is on page 17 in your summary of debt. And then also on page 18, TMBF loan number 2, which is about $20.376 million. And again, using the same principle. And I'd say a 5% coupon, I think it's also important. The market will set what the coupon is, not to exceed 5%, which is what we'll put into the bond resolution itself, and then also in the offertory statements. It may be 3%, it may be 4%. Our push is to get as much premium as possible. And if you can get the same premium with a 4% coupon, then you're going to do much better off on your actual true interest cost or your actual cost of carrying the debt. So again, this is something that's set by the market. It's not anything that we would specifically want to tell the market, but we do want to push for premium in this market environment, okay? Going back again, looking at page 6, with a 5% coupon, you generate, another premium scenario, and we are estimating that because it's a little bit longer, the true interest cost is going to be about 1.27%, but you'd only have to be generating about $17.8 million worth of par bonds. So collectively, and if you were to look at that in summary on page 8, you'd be reducing on July 1, 2020, your overall debt service, both in the governmental side and also on the water services side, of just right under $4 million, okay? And as I mentioned also before, you'd be removing all of your variable rate debt. You would also, like I said, have a lower principal amount outstanding, and all of those things work very well in the rating process, whether it's reaffirming your current rate or getting a new rate for any additional debt that you may be wanting to do into the future. So overall, it seems to be a good number for the city to do that. Oh, and by the way, I didn't mention this. It's expected that if we use the 5% coupon, which generates a true interest cost of about 1.27%, your savings there would be estimated, again, versus budget, which Melissa uses, of right about $890,000 in gross, okay, over the life of those bonds. So anyway, the last page on page 8 is our sources and uses. And as you can see on the top on the sources would be the par amount, which would be about $35 million worth of par amount of debt. The premium, which we're anticipating or would estimate to be about $4.3 million. And those monies would not only retire approximately $39.1 million worth of principal, it would also pay the cost of issuance, which would include your bond rating for both companies, your bond counsel, your municipal advisor, and any other fees that are associated with the issuance of that, along with the underwriter's discount, which is done at the sales side. And again, the estimate for the underwriter's discount is just an estimate. We won't know that until the day of the actual sale, but that is reflected in what we also expect to be your true interest cost for that debt. So even, given today's market rate, yes, it would be nice to be able to pick up some savings. But you also have a lot of other collateral advantages to doing that as well, particularly as you're looking at, how are you going to fund this, your community investment program going forward. And also, if there's any other money out there that you might want to try to refund, or if there are any other projects that you might want to refund, it wouldn't be bad to add that together. Again, it makes everything a little bit more effective in the marketplace, more efficient, and you can spread out your cost, particularly a lot of those fixed costs, over the number of bonds that you're actually refunding. But again, these are just options, and we're not advocating any one particular way to do this, but we do suggest that the refunding is definitely to the city's best advantage.
So, just to sum up.
Yes, sir.
We're refinancing roughly $39 million in debt.
Correct.
Down to 35.
That's correct. Yes, sir.
And then we're saving, what's the annual cost we're saving on interest expense? What's that number?
It's about $400,000 for the governmental side. Again, almost $482,000.
That's off of our debt service, off of our operating budget.
You wouldn't have to use the 2.5% estimate. You'd be using whatever, you'd be using the actual coupons, but with the lesser outstanding debt service, 5%.
I'm saying this jokingly, but why wouldn't we do that? We're saving $4 million in debt service and saving $400,000 a year. Do you need action from the council to save $4 million and save $5 million a year?
Yeah, well, we officially, legally, yes. But what we'd like to do, and it's, to sum it up, we save on principal, we save on debt service, we reduce the risk that's outstanding. So
What's
that goes to your point.
What's our amortization?
Oh, it would be maturity to maturity. So if you went to the governmental side, it would only be 4 more years, and with the water and sewer, 7.
So it's
Yeah, it
same
doesn't
thing.
We're not linked.
You're not lengthening any. No, sir. We would not recommend doing that at all. You don't need to. Okay, you don't need to.
So with that said, what we'll do is do what John said, and we'll look at our other fixed rates to see if it makes sense to make it cost effective to do more. But at least for the variable rates, we'll write that up and bring it back to council in the near future.
It's just, the market is just, I can't explain it. And maybe Councilman LaLance has a little bit more insight as to why the market is what it is, but
You won't talk.
when you did your last refunding like this and saved millions of dollars versus the budget number that you were using, I would have told you this is the best rates you'll ever would have gotten, and I probably did tell some of y'all that. Well, I was wrong, and these are the best rates you're ever going to get.
This takes all the variable rate debt.
Yes, sir.
off of the-
Well, except for the electric, and we're leaving the electric piece alone for other reasons, but more importantly, they've got enough cash
It's only 3 days.
that even if the rates went crazy, they could just take their cash and just pay off the debt. That's exactly right. It's very small, it's very short, and although it would look good to throw it into the deal, it just doesn't make sense for the city to do that. It's not in your best interest.
And there's another small one that's about to be paid off that we wouldn't.
That's it. Whether you do have one more maturity on that. That's the one that we threw out that I mentioned earlier. At first, there were 4 refunding candidates that we were looking at, and we took one of those out for this particular case because you only have one maturity. And again, you're in a position to be able to manage that very, very well.
All right, any questions? No, thank you very much.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, John.
Do y'all have any more hard decisions you need the council to make?
Yeah.
Well, funny you should ask.
You have to be careful what you ask.
Yeah.
All right, we'll move to our CIP fiscal year 20 and 21.
Okay. So today we're going to discuss the FY20 and 21 CIP project specifically. Our plan is to request approval of the FY20 CIP today and then get feedback on the 21 projects. We'll continue to review and scrutinize all of our projects and bring back the FY20 CIP that'll run 21 through 25. We'll bring that back to y'all for y'all's approval of the of FY21 when we bring in the FY21 operating budget. And the plan is to move us towards having CIP budget align with the operating budget each year. So I laid out a handout there for you. You'll see on the worksheets that you received and the link I sent earlier this week that the projects all have a priority assigned to them. Items with a 0 are really placeholder items where cost, timing, or scope of the project may be unknown, but these items may be shown as future funding or other funding, but we want you to be aware that they are on the horizon. Items with a 1 should be funded in 2020 or 21. And these projects have a higher priority. They may already be partially funded from outside sources or from previous CIPs. And construction may have already begun, or we may be contractually obligated to move on those projects. Items 2 should be funded in 22 or 23, and items 3 are priority items as well, but staff feels like they can be pushed out 3 to 5 years. So as you look at our overall CIP, you'll see that we're proposing around $770 million in capital projects over the next several years. We've secured funding for about $343 million of these projects, which means that 45% of the projects proposed have already been funded either through previous borrowings or through state, federal, or other grants or developer-funded projects. So almost 70% of all of our entire $770 million CIP plan is for roadways, which would be expected. Recreation makes up about 12%. Public safety, which is police and fire, makes up 9%, while schools make up an additional 6%. Just focusing on the FY20 CIP here, we're proposing around 23.5 million. Roads and recreation, again, top those uses with recreation making up 39% of the 20 CIP and roads following closely with 37%. So in August, I presented council with the 2020 CIP and the summary of major projects. Most of those are very similar still in what we're presenting today. They include the Parks and Recreation Siegel renovations, which is an estimated $14 to $15 million project as part of the city's agreement with TSSA to make improvements to the soccer park. And it also combines remaining projects out on Jordan Farm for the lighting and bathroom and pavilion all into one major CIP there. We do have about $4.9 million in previous funding and are budgeting $6.7 million in the 2020 CIP and then another $1 million in 21 and a little bit in 22 as well. On staying with recreation, we also have the Greenway North Connector, which is a $3 million project that will connect the Greenway to the Richard Siegel Park and extend the trail to Walter Hill. Design for this is ongoing, and we have construction funding of a little over $1 million in 2020 and then about $1.5 million in 21. A park or parks are being considered and are in the planning phase for the west side of town. So we have $800,000 in 2020 for planning, including studies and engineering. And then any additional funding is placed in future CIPs for planning purposes, but the construction of the parks is listed as future funding beyond this 5-year plan. So Chris discussed a lot of the road projects earlier that are on this as well. Cherry Lane Phase 2 tops our projects in the roads for the 2020 CIP. This project is estimated right around $17 million. Includes widening Cherry Lane to a 5-lane road with curb and gutter and sidewalks. And we're including $2 million in this year's CIP with the remaining funding coming in 21 and 22. The River Rock Beezy Road Bridge is an economic development opportunity that will construct a bridge over Stones River near Old Racket Club Drive and includes intersection improvements at Warrior and New Salem. The total cost here is estimated around $8.5 million, with $1 million needed in 2020 for design. Robert Rose is about a $2 million project, and we've already borrowed about $1.5 million in previous fundings. Additional $500,000 is needed to complete the project, and that will consist of the turn lanes to help with traffic conditions at Robert Rose and Thompson. Warrior Drive is a $5 million project, again part of that economic development opportunity, where the city is going to fund $3 million and the state will fund $2 million. This project will include a 3-lane road extension from Warrior Drive to Beezy. The few other projects or major projects in the 2020 CIP include the transit facility. This is a federal, state, and local joint project to construct a new facility for Rover. We've had previous borrowings of about $325,000, and then we're budgeting for $1 million in 2020, and then around another $1.5 million in 21 and in 22. We've got $2 million in for planning purposes for courtroom construction to move city court outside of City Hall and better use the space within City Hall for administrative needs. And then finally, we have on fire and rescue a pumper apparatus replacement for $700,000. Again, like I said, this will replace an existing apparatus. So this is just a high level of the 2020 projects. Are there any questions about any of these before we look at 21?
The $2 million for the courtroom construction, with the courtroom going over to the new judicial building, that's for the construction of the internal construction on that building. Is that what we're looking at for that $2 million?
No, I think well, yes, partly, and then I think it also includes some remodeling in City Hall to
That
put that back.
particular area to get it up to a conference room or whatever it would be used as.
And then offices in the
Okay,
back.
so that's both.
Yes. Yeah.
$800,000 on the west side park discussion. What's that for? I know you went through that, but I don't think I was paying attention, so. Sorry.
That's okay. Nate may better be able to explain what that's for. Do you want to come up, Nate?
And I'll just say, the reason I ask, because we're talking about one potential park site, potentially selling that property and then having another potential park site. We talked about repurposing, so I'm just curious what we know and what that's for and that's.
So that $800,000 gets us started really in depth on the planning process for whatever property we decide to move forward with. So it's pretty simple.
Which property have we decided to move forward with?
I don't think that's been determined completely yet.
So how do we know that's going to cover what we're going to do if we haven't determined?
I think that would get us started with the planning. It wouldn't cover the whole planning process, but it gets us to really the next phase of borrowing to get it completed. And I think that's kind of the best way to explain it.
If we had to supplement it, we'd come back with additional funds. If we haven't made a decision, then obviously we wouldn't spend a whole lot. So, that money would still be out there for use. But yeah, it's for planning. The park on the west side would be likely large enough where we'd do some master planning type of activity. So it would be an extensive planning process, and that's why it's at that amount. And that may not be sufficient, but then we would come back and once we made a decision on a park site and the amenities that would go in there, then we'd have a lot more visibility on what.
I think Councilman, excuse me, Craig, sorry.
Go ahead.
I think that and also we've done an extensive amount of planning thus far in the project, and a lot of that can be translated to whatever site we decide to move forward with too. So I think we've done a lot that we can still use. We just have to make that final determination once we complete a site.
It's safe to say that we're still considering a additional site for the park purposes primarily, and small park use on the property that's out on Veterans Parkway.
Yeah, the original Blackman Park, I think we've talked about that quite a bit, and we do want to develop some form of a park, and it will be a little bit of a smaller community park there.
Yeah, that's you.
I think that we're still looking for the larger piece of property that could serve as.
I think you got a microphone right above you. If you would just angle it where it ain't pointed at that microphone, you'll probably be right.
Is that better? Good. So we're still looking for the big piece of property. I think we do want to include a community park element with trails, pavilion, and playground at the other site.
Is it a sign? Is that a sign?
Is it this one?
Nate's radioactive.
Keep on moving down.
Just keep
till
on
we
getting
find one
closer.
Keep moving.
Does that make sense? Did I answer your question, Councilman?
Yes, sir. Thank you.
On the transit facility, I didn't think we had what are we talking about, $4 million of our money in that? I didn't think that was kind of what we had been talking about going into this. Wasn't that number a lot less?
Come up, Jim. Come up here. Jim has a good handle on that facility.
I'm just really, it was pretty simple. I'm just trying to figure out. I just remembered the transit facility being a much smaller participation on our part. Is that not right? I mean,
Part of our participation that we plugged in was for potentially a new property for the park and ride facility next to us. We joined two projects together, in essence, with the transit facility. The transit facility and a park and ride facility that we were working with. So we're trying to do two projects simultaneously. Well, do the transit facility first and then do the park and ride facility as a second phase with partnership from WECO and RTA. So we're trying to get additional funds for that. So we're kind of leveraging some of our dollars for the property itself. Does that make sense?
yeah.
So right now it's more of a worst case scenario,
Yeah.
you think?
Yes.
And it may go down for
It
22.
could go down, correct.
Thanks. You got control of the slides?
Mhm.
Back it up one.
Sure.
No, go back forward where you just were. That Warrior Drive to Beasy Road, is it $5 million to make that road just go from, I mean, there's no bridge or anything in that, is there? Seems kind of,
It's
does that have the bridge in it?
it's about $2 million for improvements to the intersection itself, from Warrior Drive and
okay.
99, and $3 million for the road.
All right, yeah. You said that, I forgot, sorry.
Yeah, just stay up there. That's okay.
I was paying attention, I just forgot.
Any other questions on 2020? I can move into 21 now.
Yeah, the bridge is right there.
I think it's
Go
a
ahead and
good
vote.
point. You know, we had a lot of discussion last 2 weeks over the Cason Lane and 99 area, and you know, talked about it somewhat, but not into this detail. But you've got significant investment that's going to be happening in that 99 Cason Lane, Robert Rose, River Rock area. So over the next 2 years, 3 years. And we saw the numbers that Sam Huddleston gave us on what these projects actually do to the traffic count. So I think it's a good point to let the residents know we heard them and we're working on that.
Yeah, and the Hidden River project, I mean, so much of their concern was based on traffic, and of course, that was a 10-year project, but we're currently looking at 2020 addressing those concerns that they had, and I think that's the positive of what you're looking at right there is.
And Sam's been doing a great job actively getting the right of way for us as these developments occur, and so we have a place to build the project.
And just for clarification for me, the 2020 funding, it would be our portion of what we're funding, not including state and federal monies that are part of those projects.
The total on the 2020 funding, which is 23, what's that number, 23,532.
Right.
That's just our portion.
So that, for example, River Rock, that $8 million, that includes state and federal monies as well, or?
No, that's all us.
That's all us on the River Rock. That's primarily about
Warrior Drive.
about $3 to $4 million for the bridge over the river there.
So it'd be $1 million in 2020, and then the next 2 years,
That's what I'm getting
$1.5
at.
million,
So-
$6 million in 2022.
So it's not $8 million in 2020?
No, it's not $8 million in 2020.
And the road that would continue River Rock on over to where the jail is, over in that area, Malloy Lane or whatever, Mallory Lane or Malloy. At the 20-something million, what's it cost to bridge across the interstate?
Probably about $5 to $6 million just for the bridge, and then if you remember, that's a pretty long roadway to connect on over all the way to State Route 99. But it's on our wish list that Councilman Lance mentioned.
Will we be able to get any federal grant money or anything towards that bridge, you think?
We haven't found anything that it fits in yet. They usually like
The fact that we're avoiding interstate connectivity is probably hurting us there, isn't it?
They've actually got a LIC, local intersection connector, but it will help us on that. The SIA, certainly if we get any sort of economic development money, the SIA always seems to be willing to help.
All right, we'll move to 2021.
Well, yeah, if we could get approval on 2020, and we'll move forward in how we're going to finance it. And some of those projects, short of financing, so if council will take action on 2020,
Okay.
we can get that done.
For me, are we going to talk about, and this is just my concern, how we're going to finance them before we vote on whether or not we're going to approval?
But we can, there's a potential for financing with the cellular electric department, and that would be one way. We have, and we've worked with John on financing through a debt structure in case we do need to do that. So the typical financing would be a debt structure on that. And the alternative financing could be using the cash proceeds out of MED sale. Either way, we have the capacity to be able to do either one of those. So some of these projects, getting them started, particularly like the major project this year with Siegel, to meet our requirements, we need to start expending some funds out of there. We have expended some funds that we've financed in the past on that in order to keep the project going. But yeah, if we could get approval on getting going on these.
But you still have to come to us with
The different financing options, yes, we will discuss those. Like I said, it's either debt financing or cashing it out, and we have both those alternatives potentially. But if we do, the cash possibility doesn't work out for whatever reason, then we have the capacity to do our debt financing and accommodate this year. The reason you have in front of you multiple years is if we do financing this year, it will have an impact on next year and how we go forward. But we're not going to ask any decisions on next year's financing, so there's still room in there both on how we finance and what we do the next year to discuss that.
Aaron, how much are we paying off or projected to pay off in 2020? Do you know offhand?
I don't.
For debt service?
Yeah, I don't know that on your.
We draw, well, I'll have to,
That's-
yeah, we might happen to have it. I can get my mouse to work. I'm not gonna be able to access that. We do pay, in the next 2 years, we drop our debt service pretty substantially.
Yeah, this is after our payments.
Yeah, but if you look at, there's a chart on here on the debt. That's water and sewer. You can kind of see the magnitude of it. So page 14 on there shows 2021 debt service, and then 2022, you can see it drops, just looking at the chart,
About $6 million.
about $6 million. In 2025, we drop another. Yeah, that's just debt service. And principal. All right.
Yeah.
Sorry, I didn't hear that. 31 million is what we'll pay off this year.
Page 69 of the audit report, it shows the due within 1 year. That would be what's due this fiscal year, ending June 30.
So I may be the only one that thinks this is a little backwards, but that's okay, I guess, since everybody's got to vote on it. So I think we should be talking about how we're going to finance what we're going to do rather than deciding what we're going to do. Obviously, that may not be what the council chooses to do, which is totally fine. But I would be okay from a debt service standpoint borrowing the money to finance the projects. I would not be for using the MED money to finance the projects, but that's just me.
And just for a point of reference, we did budget this year for interest on $25 million, as though we would go to market with the $25 million in the fiscal year 20 budget.
So, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
I just,
When does that, like, typically, when would that decision, I mean, I think in the past, it's typically done in this order, right? We kind of discuss what it is we want to do, and then there's a time that we have a vote on basically the bond resolution or whatever. I mean, sometimes that seems like it's soon around budget. Sometimes it seems like it's way away. We wait till the next year or something. I mean, when would it be typical that we would make the decision on how to finance this particular year?
Well, if we took last year for an example, we did it
In March or February?
March or February of last
So
year.
it's a year from now
Yeah, a year ago.
about this.
A year ago, we decided on the 2019. Now we're deciding on 2020 about now. Now, we didn't have the discussion that Councilmember Martin was talking about because we didn't have, it was just debt financing. That's what we're going to do.
And we were
So-
funding a school.
And we were funding a school. So now, we're at a point where we have an additional alternative to discuss, and we wouldn't go out to market until we had that discussion with all of council. We're not prepared to do that now because there's some questions that need to be answered. I guess the best way to say it is if we did our normal course, we'd be right here talking about debt financing. We don't have to go to debt right now. We don't have to go to market right now and do the debt financing on this. If we get approval, we have cash to be able to start our projects and go forward, and in the next few weeks come back and have that discussion. So it's a short time frame. But if we had the projects at least locked in, when I say locked in, I mean we can always change the CIP. It's not, once we start a project and start expending money on it, the worst thing you can do is just walk away from the money you spent until you start building. If you start building a road, it's pretty hard to walk away from it because you're not going to have much use for it.
I mean, my opinion, I think it makes sense if we already went through our budget and we budgeted on our debt service for adding $25 million, then that would be the route that we would need to go because we've already budgeted that. But going on what Councilman Martin's saying, I hate in terms of this way, we have a contract. I have a contract on my house. I don't want to go out and buy a bunch of things contingent that that's going to close and borrow money that's going to close and then it not close.
But we budgeted for it.
Right. So we've already budgeted to borrow.
Yeah, we've got a worst-case scenario planned for regardless. So, if the projects are going to be approved either way, regardless if we fund through proceeds or through a bond.
2020 is not really, if we've already budgeted that $25 million, which we did through our bond.
Well, we budgeted just interest. We didn't budget a principal payment or anything.
2021 is really the larger borrowing that we're going to have the discussion on.
Yeah.
How to do that. So
Well, in the end, it really just boils down to do we think these are still important enough projects that we either borrow or we pay for it? The third option, which you didn't mention, and we did have the option of last year, is pay it out of fund balance. You don't have to necessarily borrow $23 million. We got that much in fund balance. We could drain that thing if we wanted to. There is an option, right? I don't think it's a good option.
Yeah. I didn't want to say that.
I'm just saying, it's an option always to use the money out of your bank account to do this. Right?
And the other part we do have to consider after the conversations that John just had with us, if there is the ability to go look at some of the other variable debt that we've got, if we just saved, $5 million in debt plus $500,000 in interest in principal, if there's a way that there's some other things out there that we're able to use that for our principal and interest on what we're looking at borrowing. So
Well, and I think what John said is the net would be about $500,000 savings because of that increased coupon rate. So we wouldn't have $5 million plus the $500,000. Yeah.
we're refinancing 39 to 35.
Right.
But
Right.
And saving in our operating, and at the same time paying off 31 this year and looking to bring back 23. So, our debt service is going to go down in 2021 anyway because we're going to have $8 million less.
Right. It will be increasing our capacity for sure, and regardless there, yep.
So the typical process and what we're following now is the council approves CIP, and then we have a period of time where we figure out the best way to finance it, whether it's out of fund balance or we go out and borrow or, one of the other ways. So we're kind of following that. And we're going to back this up with 2021, like we've all talked, to try and align the CIP more with our budget process. So that's why we're going to go immediately from 2020 to start to talk about 2021. But we're at a point now where we're at typically, or a little bit behind that, where we have the projects approved, and then we as staff will go out and figure out the best way to find the money and finance that, whether it's fund balance or debt or an alternative. And then when that decision's made, then that comes back to council. So we're really not off pace of what we normally do, except now we're going to start talking about 2021, and that's just to advance that cycle. So we're not in March talking about last year.
Yeah, and I'm going to vote yes based on the fact that this has already been budgeted and that we do not touch that MED money until we decide what we're going to do with it.
Right.
Because...
Yeah, we wouldn't do that anyway.
Yeah, because, I kind of felt like maybe I misinterpreted that if we need more money that we're going to, because I think I heard somebody say something about MED, but I'm not for doing this, touching a penny of MED's money until we sit down and decide what we're going to do with that money.
No, we're stating
Do not touch that money.
There is, well, we're waiting for approval. There is no money at this point in time, and there wouldn't be until, council is well informed of it. We don't spend any money without.
Right, but I'm just saying, this is the only way I'm going to vote for it. Don't touch that money. Don't touch MED's money.
Well, like I said, Councilmember, there isn't the money, and we wouldn't do that in any event.
No, but I'm saying this is contingent on that. That's how my vote's going to be.
All right.
I have a doctor's appointment that I set up well before we move this
Before you
back.
sit by me.
Yeah, I know. You're sliming me up. So did this change any since our meeting last week? It seems like there's a couple of changes, but no.
Minor changes.
Do we need to vote on today? Can we wait till Thursday night?
We can wait till Thursday night.
Anybody got? That way, if we got any questions we need to ask, we
Next
can get
Thursday
that.
night.
We can kind of do that after follow up.
meeting next Thursday because
I'm okay with it. So, I mean, it's whatever.
Yeah.
President's Day, what is the next Thursday? Oh, it'll be the
next
27th, I guess.
All right. Well, look, here's all I'm saying.
It
I don't
doesn't matter.
I think I know what you're trying to say, but I don't know if you can make your vote answer contingent on how we spend the money. I mean, I think we got to decide whether or not we think these projects are good or not good to do for the city. And then there is a time period and another vote that's separate to decide how we pay for it. I'm not like stuck on either way. I don't care. I'm not, I really just don't have that opinion right now that strongly about, whether we should use this or should use that. But I think we're going to have an avenue to make that decision as far as where we pay it from, whether we borrow it or whether we use cash from the fund balance or from selling a piece of property on Medical Center Parkway or whatever, or MED. Okay? Are you comfortable with just as far as making the motion, we just decide, hey, is this something, are these
Yeah.
things we
Yeah.
want to do? I just don't think what you're saying is you don't think these are good ideas.
No,
If we're going to
no,
use,
I said,
right. I mean, but you're
no,
saying
I
you're
think
not
they're
for it.
excellent ideas and they are really needed. But I'm saying when it comes time to paying, let's look at that because I won't be for touching that MED money until we sit down and,
It sounds like what you're saying is you're going to vote for this.
Oh, yeah.
Only if it's contingent on we don't use that. I
Yes.
don't think we can make that decision right now. That's why.
Yeah.
So when I make the motion, I just want to make sure you were cool with it.
if I'm not, I'll say no.
No, I just, because of the way I make, because I think it's the only way we can
I
make
got
the
you.
motion.
I got you.
So, but the MED portion is not in the 2020 budget.
Yeah, I mean, we
So
can't.
we can vote.
Yeah, I mean, my opinion, we don't even need to be talking about funds that we don't have yet.
Yeah, that's
So,
what I'm saying. It's not in the
You
budget,
know,
so
I
we
mean,
can really actually
we-
vote.
I mean, the MED, I know we've gone through the whole process, but I mean, there's a lot that can happen between now and April and May. So, I mean, we need to function as if that's
got
not going to happen. And
I'm cool. Go on, take your flu on out of here. And
No, I'm not sick. I just got to get this Elvis. I got to get my wing figured out. All right, I'm gonna make a motion that we allow staff to go forward with pursuing this on the things that are on the CIP as presented for the 2020 CIP. Yeah.
All right, we
And
have
I'll
a motion
second it.
In a second. Ms. Wright.
Vice Mayor Skels Harris.
Aye.
Mr. LaLance.
Aye.
Mr. Martin.
No.
Mr. Shacklet. Mr. Smotherman.
Aye.
Mr. Wade.
Aye.
Mayor McFarland.
Aye.
Okay, so we'll move into the 21 projects now. Alright. Okay, so as I said before, we'll submit the 21 CIP to council with the FY21 operating budget. We're anticipating the 21 CIP to come in around 60 million. Right now, the information you have shows just a little over 63 million, or right around 63 million. But we intend to continue to work to get that number better fine-tuned and bring that down. Again, roads make up the majority of the requests, coming in at 70% of the CIP. Public safety comes in at 13%. And solid waste and recreation both make up 6% each. And then schools 3% of the 21 CIP. So just continuing with our roads theme, major projects include, of course, the Cherry Lane Phase 2 and 3 for a combined FY21 CIP budget of $13 million. Again, we've talked about this several times now today, but that's a total $70 million project.
and has about $7 million in federal funding and previous borrowings of around $2.5 million. Again, we look to alleviate traffic conditions on the north side of town by providing routing between Broad and Memorial, widening to that 5-lane road with the curb and gutter, and adding the 840 interchange. Chris also discussed Rucker Lane earlier. That's included in this at around $7 million. And the total project is around $14 to $15 million, of which we've borrowed $8.5 million already. So this will improve about 2.5 miles of roads and will 3-lane Rucker Lane from 96 to Veterans Parkway, and will also include curb gutter and sidewalks. So we have the Brinkley Road construction, which we discussed earlier as well. That includes previous borrowings of $2.8 million of this $13.5 million project. We've got $5 million in the 21 CIP, an additional $5.7 million in 22. And this will rebuild Brinkley Road to a 3-lane with curb gutter and sidewalks and link Highway 96 to Florence Road. We have the Lytle Street reconstruction, which is a $3.5 million project. We've already borrowed a little bit, or we've included a little bit in the 2020 CIP of about $250,000, and in the balance in the 21 CIP. And this real work to reconstruct the area around the former First United Methodist block, and includes Lytle Street, North Church, North Spring, and West College. The Carolyn Farms project includes a 3-lane section between the proposed Cherry Lane, and will work to connect Carolyn Farms from Cherry Lane to Thompson Lane. This project will again provide an alternate route to Memorial and will alleviate traffic conditions on the north side of town. This is a $3.5 million project. We've already got $500,000 in the current CIP with $3 million budgeted in 21. We have the Front and Vine Street realignment project, which is about $2.5 million, and that will realign and signalize Front Street at the intersection with Broad Street. We have $250 in the 2020 CIP, with the remaining funds coming out of 21. The Rutherford Boulevard extension is a $23 to $25 million project that includes about $500,000 in previous borrowings and an additional $2 million in 21 for design and engineering. And this project will connect Rutherford to Warrior Drive and include a bridge over I-24. So earlier we discussed the River Rock Beasy Road Bridge. Again, this is an economic development project that we have $1 million included in the 2020 CIP, an additional $1.5 million or so in 21, and then the remaining funds are expected to be requested in the 22 CIP. So public safety totals about $8.2 million of the 21 CIP. We have fire and rescue admin offices budgeted around $6 million, with $2.3 coming out of previous borrowings from the public safety training facility, and the balance coming out of 21. This building will include training rooms as well as office space for fire admin personnel. The fire department also has equipment, including a new Quint apparatus replacement engine and a pumper apparatus replacement. And then we have about $2.5 million in CIP for police vehicles and equipment, including technology replacements for IT, mobile data, and mobile video replacements. The 21 CIP includes $2 million to fund a transfer station. The solid waste has 2 transfer stations budgeted in their CIP over a couple of different years. So the 21 CIP would fund 1 transfer station. The plan is to have a transfer station on the north side of town and one on the south side. This will improve efficiency on collection trucks by allowing them to transfer and bulk haul to the landfill rather than sending individual trucks to the landfill throughout the day. We also have solid waste has recycling center improvements and various equipment needs funded in the CIP as well. For recreation, we've got the Greenway North Connector that we discussed earlier, which has a little over $1 million budgeted in the 2020 CIP, with the remaining funds coming out of 21. Also, an additional $1 million is budgeted for the Siegel Park enhancements, and the remaining funds coming out of future CIPs for that as well. And then we have various park improvements totaling around $1 million for those listed here for Adams, Barfield, Canonsburg, Greenway, and Old Fort, ball field, and parking improvements. So, thank you for approving the 2020 CIP. Again, we'll work to finalize 21 numbers with the FY21 operating budget and present that to y'all in May, with the goal of having that approved in June. And then 22 through 25 will be presented as well. Right now, the information for 22 through 24 is really, like I said earlier, it's more placeholder for those projects while we continue just to fine tune the numbers and estimates based on construction or, other outside revenue, outside funding sources we may get outside of the CIP. Are there any questions on the 21 projects that are presented?
Have we ever thought about what we're gonna do with the old police building?
No, not yet. We're looking at that entire area as redevelopment, so we haven't focused on the building itself. We haven't identified any suitable needs to go in there in the interim. And it's not really in a condition to handle any other needs.
Any questions on 2021? All right, let's move into our update on December information.
That information is presented to y'all just as part of your monthly workshop agenda. If you have any questions, please let me know. The information includes not only financial, but also building and codes and risk management and road and project development information. This is through December.
Yeah, Chris gave a good update on roadways, but it is part of your package. If you go to I think it's the very end, or towards the end, there's a chart in there that gives you some information on these projects.
And I didn't print it here, but schools information is included in the agenda packet that you received electronically.
Any questions on the information you have?
Great information.
I really appreciate the work that's been done to get our dashboard to work on that. It is, and now it's a lot to absorb, but I think over a period of time we become a little bit better educated as to what these graphs mean and the information that's here. I think it's going to be very helpful to council, so I appreciate the work.
Absolutely, thank you.
All right, you have a couple of beer permits in front of you.
It's a new it's a former location of a different business, so it's a new owner and name change. They have not met the building codes, inspections, but the application is in order. So we would issue that permit if you approve it after they meet their codes.
Move for approval.
Second.
Motion second, Ms. Wright.
Vice Mayor Scales Harris, Mr. Martin,
Aye.
Mr. Shacklet,
Aye.
Mr. Smotherman,
Aye.
Mr. Wade,
Aye.
Mayor McFarland.
Aye. Any statements to be paid? Any other business from staff? Council members?
Could we get a brief update on what the water situation is in Murfreesboro as far as the status of flooding or not flooding? Or I read an article in the Daily News Journal the other day that said we were having some horrible problems with flooding, and then it had a story about flooding in the county, which made it sound like it was Murfreesboro, and it wasn't. So can we just get a brief update?
Sure, absolutely. We did have some, last Wednesday was a significant event. It looked like it, by all estimations, it exceeded a 10-year storm, which is what most of our
subdivision systems are designed to handle. Had a couple of, or probably 7, 8 streets, maybe a few more that we had to close for just a short duration, and then they were opened back up really by the next day or by the next evening. We did meet as a group this yesterday, and to go over some of the locations, and we're looking for improvements in some areas. It was about 4 to 5 inches of rain occurred last Wednesday into Thursday. We're only expecting a couple inches tonight, so we don't think we'll be quite as bad. Even with the with everything being saturated, the pipes themselves are pretty much been cleared.
I want to say too, it comes up a lot in planning. We talk about, everybody's concerned about water runoff as we talk about new developments and flooding and things like that. I think the city staff should be really proud of the job that has been done in the city with development from the standpoint that, we have some issues, and I know that area out in Salem that has flooded some. I saw where there was some money being allocated to fix some issues there. But by and large, you hear the county having a lot larger issues related to in natural areas that have not been engineered to hold and disperse water. So I think the staff deserve a lot of credit for that.
And I appreciate our consultants. They listen to us, and whenever they're designing areas, and in fact, I just talked to one this morning where they're over detaining to help an existing flooding problem on a commercial development that's coming up. So it's a team effort.
Thank you.
Thank you, though.
Yeah, and that was my whole point, was I think it needs to be recognized that.
It needs to be.
But you're exactly right. I think it's a tribute to the planning department as well as the engineering department that the design of the drainage system's working phenomenally well, considering the adverse conditions that you're dealing with. And I just, again, like Ronnie said, kudos to you guys for doing a great job. So.
Thank you very much. I'll be sure to pass that along to the guys that do it.
A quick update that I know many of us have gotten emails about Raiders Point. I think to date there's been, I don't see Robert here, but I think there's 8 or 9 citations that's been issued to that, and staff met with their attorney 2 Fridays ago, I think. It's my understanding that was not as much was accomplished as we had wanted, but they are being cited to city court. All right, any other business? We will not meet this Thursday night, and we're not meeting next Thursday night, correct?
Oh, tomorrow we won't meet. Next Thursday night's a short week, so we'll meet on the 27th, I believe.
All right, we'll stand adjourned.